look who created the system. In the context of the United States, it was slave owners. It was people who said that Black people, Latinos, and women did not have equal rights. They were not even human beings. They were 3/5 of a human being, as we saw in the U.S. constitutional compromise for Black slaves. So the reality is that from the very beginning of the creation of this system, it was never meant to be equal. And in the context of the United States, we saw the worst genocide in human history, targeting indigenous peoples, over 100 million people killed. In the context of Britain, it's not much different. I mean, Britain still is a monarchy, let's not forget, led by a queen who, when she was a child, was trained to Nazi salute by her family members who supported Nazi Germany, who met with Adolf Hitler because they saw Nazi Germany as a force that would help save them from the threat of Bolshevism, as they saw it, from communism, from socialism. So the reality is that these systems have been set up like this. And in the context of the United States, I think it's especially salient when you look at the oppression of Black people, which has continued, and it's so brutal today. And a lot of people, especially outside of the United States, don't realize that until the 1960s, the United States was an apartheid state, like apartheid South Africa. And since then, we've seen that the state has continued taking away the rights, especially of Black people, but in general of poor and working class people, also Latinos. And we've seen the reinstitution of slavery, essentially. And in fact, in the United States Constitution, according to the amendment that technically abolished chattel slavery, it allowed for slavery in the context of punishment for crimes. That is to say, slavery as punishment for people who are in prison. So slave labor is absolutely rampant in the United States. There are documentaries about this, and I would highly recommend looking into them. And we're talking about conditions in which workers are paid a few cents an hour, if anything at all. And they're forced to do things like in California, when there are large fires, prisoners are sent out to put out the fires, risking their lives. They're paid almost nothing, and they're disproportionately Black and Latino, and basically all poor. Rich people don't go to prison in the United States. They can afford great lawyers who can talk them out of their charges, even when rich people kill people, even when the rich are caught with huge quantities of drugs, whereas poor people with a small bag of drugs go to prison for decades. So the reality is that the system was created to function this way. And we haven't even talked about the role of the system as an empire, because in the context of the United States and Britain, these are not just normal, in scare quote, countries. These are countries, these are empires, these are systems that were created to dominate the entire planet. And the reality is that in the United States, the majority of revenue spent by the government, the majority of tax dollars, does not go to administer domestic affairs. It goes to administer 800 military bases abroad. It goes to wage dozens of wars. I mean, people talk about the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the war in Yemen, the war in Syria, but there are also unconventional wars being waged around the world. The U.S. through AFRICOM has special operations forces operating on almost every single country on the African continent. The U.S. has military bases spanning every continent. So the reality is that the U.S. is not only is it not a democratic system, it was never set up to be a democratic system, but it also isn't a democracy. It's an empire. And as the brilliant scholar Michael Parenti always says, the empire feeds on the republic. You can't have a republic and an empire. That was equally true for the Roman Empire. It was true for the British Empire, and it's true today for the U.S. Empire.